A month into sophomore year, it's time for me to take my first honors physics exam. I come in feeling pretty confident that I'm going to do well on this test because I had been a pretty good student in the past, but I come out having finished just barely half the test. And when the results come back, I see that I score well below average. I got a 54%, and that I was on track to get a C in the class. So in that moment, I considered just giving up and accepting that I'd either get a C, or I also thought about dropping out. But after a while, I thought about it and I wanted to do better. I wanted to be able to get a good score, to be able to be doing above average again in this class. So I started looking around at the students and seeing what they were doing differently. I noticed that, first of all, they were finishing the problems a lot faster. They seemed to find the math easier. And when they would come into class, they would be a lot more prepared and they would know how to do the problems. So using the differences I noticed between my study strategies and the students around me, I started closing the gap slowly but surely. So every physics test I took, I would be scoring 10% higher. And by the second semester of my sophomore year, I took my first physics test and I got 100%. So it felt really awesome to see that improvement, and it motivated me to keep studying and keep seeing where I could get to. And by the end of my sophomore year, I had the highest grade out of anyone in class. And in junior year, I ended up getting the highest grade out of all students in my school. So I look back at this time very fondly because this experience really formed my relationship with competition and comparison into something productive and something that I could apply to all aspects of my life. So I want to tell you a bit about my framework and how I view it. So the first thing that happens when you compare yourself with someone else is that you see a gap. So I noticed that my scores were much lower than the other students, and then I noticed that they were finishing the problems a lot faster than me. And you can use that gap to really motivate you, and that's what it's useful for. So I went from thinking, oh, okay, I guess I'm just going to live with a C, to no, I don't want this to stay the same, I want to change this. So that is where output level comparison, meaning you comparing your numbers to someone else, is very, very useful. But where I think that output level comparison can go wrong is where you start making a value judgment against the other students and accepting it. So initially what I thought was, oh, I'm just less smart than the other students. They are just better at physics than me. And you should never use the output level comparison to diminish yourself in that way, because that's where it gets very demotivating and very not useful. So now I was feeling very motivated to change my situation, but simply looking at the outputs of me versus the other students was not useful and did not tell me any useful information about how I could change my situation. So that's where input level comparison is super useful, and that's comparing your actions and your actions in the past to the actions of others and their actions in the past. So I noticed that the students were making a really big effort to understand every problem, and that they weren't just looking at it and realizing that they knew how to do the problem, and that they also had a much larger amount of math experience than I had, because a lot of them were juniors or seniors. So for me, that meant changing my study strategies to spend more time studying so I could catch up with them, and also spending a lot more time sitting with the problem and trying to attack it myself, so that I can actually go through the process of learning these techniques. I also did some things to increase my speed as well, since that was a major reason that I hadn't finished half the test. So I think comparison gets a bad reputation because we're told that it's the enemy of self-esteem. And by comparing yourself to others, you're either putting yourself down or inflating your ego far beyond what you should. But I think comparison is very, very useful in that it allows you to see what's possible and motivate yourself to get there. And on top of that, it allows you to see what specific differences you can make in your actions to be able to get to that place. The thing that I always remember to do is to use the output level comparison purely for motivation, and to always go one step deeper into the input level comparison and focus on the different actions that you need to be taking to get to your desired output, rather than staying in the loop of comparing yourself to others and changing your emotions a lot to feel better than them or worse than them, because that's where comparison can get really toxic.